Good afternoon. My name is Honor Feedy, and I'd like to welcome you all to this afternoon's NAESP webinar on Designing Principal Evaluation Systems, Research to Guide Decision Making. We're so happy today to have you all. We wanted to have a special webinar that would go over our new joint NAESP-NASSP report on principal evaluation. With us this afternoon, we have two of our researchers. Stephen Ross is with the Center for Research and Reform in Education at Johns Hopkins University. He's a lead researcher there and writer. We also have Matthew Clifford, who's with the American Institutes for Research, and he also is lead researcher on this project. And I have with me Kelly Pollard, who's NAESP staff, and she is our Associate Executive Director in our Policy and Advocacy Department. So between these three experts, we will have a wonderful session. And for those of you that are just joining us now, I would encourage you to complete the poll. We're about to close it. We did want to find out a little bit about the background of our attendees. Also, if you haven't done so already, I'd encourage you to go to our website at www.naesp.org/webinars. And there you can download today's PowerPoint presentation as well as a copy of the Rethinking Principal Evaluation Report. Both of those are very helpful for you as we go through this webinar. There'll be resources and contact information at the end of this webinar for you to follow up in case we don't get your questions answered today. Matt, do you want to start us out?
Sure. So first of all, thanks to everybody who is joining this webinar. We have 11 people who are signed in currently, so this is a nice and intimate group. So just so that everybody knows each other, we have 14% of you said that you were superintendents, 57%, a little over half, said that you were principals, and 14% said that you were in a state education agency staff. And then 14 others clicked the other state level representative button. So I think that that the poll is representative not only of the type of interest, but the breadth of interest in this topic, which is principal evaluation. We hope that this is an interactive question and answer session. Please do raise your questions during the session through the chat box. I want to begin by saying that by surveying the national landscape a little bit. Principal evaluation and performance assessment has been on the radar screen since the passage of No Child Left Behind. But unfortunately in many states it has been pushed to the side in favor of changes to teacher evaluation and other initiatives that have come on the education landscape. We know, however, that in recent years, with Race to the Top legislation, school improvement grants, and the teacher incentive fund grants, that principal evaluation has sort of come to the fore. And now with education waivers, the federal government is pretty consistently sent messages to states and districts about the types of things that should be involved in principal evaluation. From a federal perspective, the belief is that principal evaluation should be organized around a framework that describes what principals should be able to do. That framework should include at least 4 levels of performance so that principals get the feedback that they need to make changes. That a formative and summative evaluation should probably be included on an annual basis, and that at least with the teacher incentive fund grants, the recommendation is that principals should be observed. Just as teachers are observed, principals should be observed at least twice per year. In some recent research, we took a look at state policy changes and state policy designs. This report, which was written by Catherine Jacques, Katie Horning and I, is available at the website that's on the screen. But what it shows, I think, is that 34 states have recently, as of 2005, passed some legislation that relates to principal evaluation design changes. 23 of those states will be moving forward with changes in principal evaluation within the next 3 to 4 years. So if you're in a state, you may not be alone in feeling the pressure to make changes to principal evaluation design. So here's a question for you. When will you be implementing a new principal evaluation system in your district or state? So if you could respond quickly to the poll, that would be really helpful to us in adjusting our comment. And Honor can report that back at a later point.
We have one respondent who says within the next 6 months. Another one was between 1 and 2 years. Another one doesn't know when Texas will develop or implement. Another person said this year. Another person said not sure, maybe introduced into legislation this session.
Great. So that's really helpful. The majority of states, as I mentioned, will be moving forward pretty rapidly. And I think the response from the person saying within the next 6 months, people are feeling that experience pretty regularly. The issue, of course, is that principal evaluation, like teacher evaluation, takes a lot of time and a lot of preparation in order to do well. We don't want to, of course, base some judgments about principals' careers and their futures on a system that is not ready to move forward and is not valid and reliable. This slide is about why principals matter. If you take a look at just from a pure numbers game, principals are uniquely positioned really to affect the 98,000 public schools, 3 million public school teachers, and 55 million pre-K-12 public school students. Principals oversee the work of teachers and set the tone really for what occurs in those public schools. Unlike many other professions, they have that responsibility. And so if we're looking at improving instructional quality and the quality of learning for students, it might behoove us, I think, to focus on the work of principals so that their practice is as best as it can be. The next slide takes a look at some of the research that we located through our literature review. The research is in a report called The Ripple Effect, and also appears in the guidelines document that's available through the NAESP and NASSP websites. So the Ripple Effect report shows pretty clearly that research shows principals are the second most influential factor in explaining student achievement. The issue with that, of course, is that principals work through many other people in order to create conditions for student achievement to increase. So the ripple effect attempts to really describe the direct influence and the indirect influence that principals have on student learning. So first of all, principal practice is at the center point of that ripple, and principals work very closely with district and community contexts to establish the right amount of resources to include in the schools, be that financial or personal resources to affect the learning of kids. The principal also works to create school conditions, which includes trust and a school culture that's conducive to the continuous improvement of instructional quality and make sure that we have the right teachers in the right classrooms working with students. And then finally, principals work most directly with teachers as instructional leaders. As teachers are attempting to improve their practices, they turn most frequently to their principals as a trusted colleague or their teacher colleagues to improve their work. And then finally, further out, and as an indirect effect, you can see student achievement and student learning gains.
We have a question about the principal evaluation report. The question is, has the ripple effect been published and peer-reviewed? And is it peer-reviewed research?
Yeah. So the ripple effect report is based on, it synthesizes major research findings over the past 12 years. It has been peer-reviewed, and it is available through the American Institutes for Research website. The link to that report is available at the end of this document in the resources area. Before we dive into some of the recommendations included in the guidelines report, I think it's important to kind of step back and think about the way that we are managing the work of instructional leaders and how evaluation fits into different human resource processes. We call them human capital management approaches to supporting the development of principal leadership. So if you think most comprehensively about the messages that principals are receiving, they receive them through these 6 different functions. First, they're prepared through pre-service education and other programs. They're recruited and hired through HR processes. There's sometimes, but not very often, an induction and mentoring period for principals as they're moving into the profession. And then they're naturally compensated and provided other incentives. The environment, whether that's within the district or the school, can be shaped to improve their practice, either through alternative staffing measures or other measures to free up time for principals to focus on instruction. And then finally, my colleagues and I think about evaluation, that's performance evaluation, and professional growth as really coupled together. That performance evaluation should be informing all of these human resource decisions and also informing the work of principals so that they're getting feedback on their practices. If these human resource functions are working at cross purposes, they're sending different messages to principals. And so what we do with our work with states and districts through the National Comprehensive Center on Teacher Quality or our Educator Talent Group is we work with states and districts to make the messages coherent and integrated so that principals are sure of what they need to do and what work is rewarded and how. What we know also from our scan, both that's included in the guidelines document and another report that Steve and I published through NAESP, is that the current practice for principal evaluation is not very strong. When asked, principals tell us that that there is that evaluation practices tend to have little influence on their work. We know from our research review that that principal evaluation shows little impact, little evidence of impact on principals' practices, teaching quality, or student learning. We also know from polling and document review that principals are oftentimes held accountable to outcomes that they do not directly control, and that provide little guidance on how to improve their work. And then finally, we know that implementation really matters. We know that principal evaluation systems tend to be inconsistently administered, and as a result, principals in one school may be held to different standards than principals in other schools. And it may be that in one school a principal receives a lot of feedback from their supervisor, while in another the principal receives no feedback. We also know that principal evaluation systems are generally not aligned specifically with professional standards such as the ISLIC standards, and that there are not instruments in place that are considered to be valid and reliable. We have a few examples of those valid and reliable instruments in some of the resources. We've conducted several reviews, and we point you to those because you're probably making some decisions about which measures to use. And then finally, a concern on the part of evaluators and principals that is reflected in the research is that principal evaluation systems are not practical, either for the evaluators or the principals, that they may collect too much of the wrong type of information, and that they require too much time of exceedingly busy people, so they can't follow the best designs. So I'll turn, at this point, the presentation over to Steve, who will talk a little bit about the Rethinking Principal Evaluation, the guidelines specifically, and the process that we use to develop them.
Okay, thank you, Matt. And I'll just go, I'm going to be going through some of the domains that we came up with in the Rethinking Principal Evaluation Manual and talk about them as guidelines for better principal evaluation. Briefly, background on the publication: it was a collaborative effort between NAESP and NASSP, and it involved Matt and myself as researchers, but the key people who contributed to the guidelines were really experienced principals who are engaged in leading schools every day. And there were several meetings where these individuals discussed what's involved in evaluation, what their experiences have been, made recommendations. And we basically filtered those recommendations and their experiences through what research showed to be evidence-based ways of doing evaluation. And the result of which was we proposed in the guidelines focusing not on only student achievement, as is sometimes done, but student achievement has to be included. It's difficult to imagine the public or a school regarding a principal as successful if student achievement does not go up, is not at a good level. But if you remember the ripple effect slide, and you probably don't remember the exact details, affecting student achievement does take time, and it's not directly under the principal control. The principal is interacting with teachers, putting a staff together. The principal is creating contextual conditions. But the principal is not in that classroom teaching, and couldn't be, because there's only one principal and 600 to 1,000 students. So student growth and achievement needs to be included. It's essential. But we also need to make the evaluation more balanced by including multiple measures. And so in this sense, we're trying to create attention for a different paradigm of principal evaluation, a paradigm that is more comprehensive and more valid, and particularly more useful for improving leadership in a school. And that brings me to the first domain, which will be on the next slide, professional growth and learning. Professional growth and learning is focusing on using evaluation to make principals better. And that makes a lot of sense to me. In the evaluation field, there are two different types of evaluation. They blend together a great deal, but we talk about these as formative evaluation and summative evaluation. And summative evaluation basically says, how did we do? What were the results? And often, and unfortunately, summative evaluation many times will make a bottom line decision by saying a program or a teacher or a leader is successful or unsuccessful. But where does that leave us? Formative evaluation is looking at programs and educational activities as they're forming. That's why it's called formative evaluation. And it's looking at them with an eye toward and a focus on improvement. Now, is any principal or teacher ever completely finished? I'm saying finished with quotes around it. Is any program, educational program, ever completely finished? Or can all of these entities, principals, teachers, and programs, get better? And we've shown time and time again through evaluation that they can. So rather than just evaluate principals and say, these particular individuals are successful, these are unsuccessful, and replace the unsuccessful ones, which, by the way, is very expensive, very disruptive. It takes a school several years to recover by having a new leader, bringing in new methods. And in rural areas throughout the country, there may not be a plethora of qualified individuals ready to step in. So using principal evaluation to help leaders improve, because we believe, and this is based on research, we've seen it, we believe that principals can improve and become better. So simply put, this domain puts emphasis on principals as part of their evaluation, developing a professional growth plan. And the key question is, at the end of the year, whenever the evaluation takes place, did this principal execute that professional growth plan that's been approved by the superintendent or the principal's direct supervisor? And if the answer is yes, we can't say for sure that the principal is going to be better that year, but the principal did go through the activities that were deemed important in becoming better, and that will most likely yield positive dividends. At the bottom left of the slide are some notes of where you could go for further information, but we're already on slide 2. And slide 2 is the domain we most know about and most hear about and emphasize, student growth and learning. We could talk for hours about the advantages and disadvantages of state test results. But all of us who are in education know that state test results are very high stakes. There's a lot of emphasis that goes beyond principal leadership, teaching to the tests, coaching, providing extra time for students to focus on state standards and what's measured. State tests are typically, almost always, objective tests, multiple choice. They can only have so many items on them. They're not necessarily measuring writing ability. Sometimes they do, higher order learning. So they have advantages of consistency and reliability, but they also have disadvantages. And you could talk about value-added scores, where we're looking at improvement, and that's important in terms of seeing whether a school that is performing low is increasing its performance. And that's another important dimension, not only absolute performance, attainment, but also growth. But growth scores tend to be volatile and can go significantly up in a given year or significantly down due to properties of the tests and error. We're suggesting that for student growth and learning, evaluation systems try to broaden the examination of student performance by possibly looking at district test results. Many districts have formative tests that they use, whether students accomplish particular learning objectives, certainly looking at measures that are level appropriate. For high school students, graduation rates are obviously a very important measure. Possibly college matriculation rates would be important. At the bottom left of the slide are sources to go to that Matt picked out that are doing good work in this area: Ohio, Indiana, Rhode Island, and Wisconsin. If we focus only on student achievement, we won't necessarily drive or facilitate principals improving their skills and performance, which was domain number 1. We also may not be looking at whether principals are putting into place the activities that lead to enhanced student achievement. we would forfeit perhaps the opportunity to look at what principals have direct control over. And principals, if you remember the ripple effect slide, principals do have direct control over school planning and progress. Principals work with the staff and perhaps the superintendent to develop each year a school improvement plan that has objectives for what needs to be accomplished this year. We all know that at some schools, or maybe many schools, school improvement plans are regarded as maybe a compliance issue that you do to satisfy the state. But I hope that's not the case at your schools, because the school improvement plans are very important. They're the map for the year. They're the contract for the year of what this school needs to do in terms of programs, professional development, resources, work with students, work with parents. And we would say, or at least raise the question, if a thoughtfully constructed school improvement plan that's been approved by the district is executed to a high degree of fidelity, has that principal done well in trying to impact student achievement, whether or not that occurs this year? And we would say, we think so. That's an important thing to do, and it should be included in an evaluation. Let's move to domain number 4. If we just looked at student achievement only, we would see the bottom line effect, what happens in a given year, but we wouldn't really have an indication of what that principal is doing to produce positive student achievement results in the long run. We've talked in the last 10 minutes about we wouldn't have any, if we just looked at student achievement, we wouldn't have an indication of what the principal is doing for improvement. And we wouldn't have an indication of what the principal is doing to implement a school improvement plan. But a precursor based on abundant literature of positive student achievement, of student achievement gains, is having a positive school culture. And we certainly could have discussion on this. But picture schools that you've gone into. You might have worked at these schools during your career where school culture is very negative. No one wants to be there. No one feels a sense of trust and collaboration. No one is very motivated to really make change. There aren't high expectations for students being able to improve. There's not faith in the teaching staff and one's colleagues to collaborate and work with one another. At these particular buildings, student achievement is much less likely to improve than in places where everybody has the spirit of cooperation, high expectations, high motivation, a feeling that teachers are regarded as professionals, that parents are welcome, that there's pride in school environment. We are a school that is on the move. And to raise student achievement, there are many things that a principal can do. But research shows that one of the important things is improving school culture. So we feel that should be part of an evaluation. At the bottom left of the screen is a website link that will give more information on measuring school climate and culture from some of the work AIR has done. Professional qualities in practice. There certainly is a rich literature on the characteristics of effective principals. Effective principals you might read and see research on are instructional leaders. Effective principals are good managers. Effective principals know how to work with resources and budgets. Effective principals are good communicators. Effective principals are available. Effective principals are active in the building. And these professional qualities have a lot of face validity to them. They have research support in showing correlations between those qualities and successful leadership, meaning ultimately gains in student achievement. And they're probably, for those very reasons, they're qualities we wish to emphasize. not every effective principal is a great communicator, but it probably is good to make every principal aware of what effective professional qualities are and help those individuals to strive to the extent that they can to improve their abilities in these qualities, because again, these qualities are correlated with success. So measuring the professional quality through staff surveys, and there are many of them. There's information you could go to at the bottom of the slide that will give recommendations or at least availability of different surveys. It's possible, where there's more time and resources, to do observations of principals, shadowing of a principal, where evaluators would spend a day or a half day with a principal, seeing what they do and how they interact with their staff, reviewing artifacts regarding meetings and events and activities and other things that the principal has done that reflect positive professional qualities.
Steve, 1 second. I have a question. There's also in here talking about instructional leadership, right? As far as working with teachers and supporting them?
Yes, I think when I started, I think I said that one of the professional qualities is being an instructional leader. Another one is being a good manager. So the literature shows that being an instructional leader who's knowledgeable about instructional methods and pedagogy and programs that can work with teachers, empower teachers, help teachers to find the most appropriate professional development. That's a very important part of principals' professional qualities, according to the literature. Stakeholder support and engagement. Is student achievement likely to be raised very quickly if the principal doesn't have support from parents, the community, the teaching staff? I consider the teaching staff stakeholders, and to a large degree I consider student stakeholders. All these groups, parents, community members, students, and teachers, the latter two most directly, are stakeholders in the success of the school. And the goal here is not to be running a popularity contest, but to the extent a principal can, over time, gather support and trust and confidence by the community, parents, students, and teachers, the ground is set for that principal to be more effective at bringing in more programs that are effective, being able to help teachers and staff to improve, and making a difference in student achievement. So in summary, these 6 domains are for the purpose of helping to make an evaluation more comprehensive, addressing both indirect effects such as student achievement. To some degree, school climate may be a little bit an indirect effect, because you can't go in one day and change school climate. You do have to change school climate through your teachers, but it's adding to the mix multiple areas to look at that make up the successful leadership, and at the same time help a principal to improve. In closing, I'd just like to say, keep in mind that although student achievement is the ultimate outcome, how long does it take to change student achievement? And the literature shows that student achievement is very correlated with context. Principals that go into very challenging situations to try to make a difference may need much more time to raise student achievement than than principals that take a position at a school that is already successful, where there already is teacher empowerment and parent support. So looking at student achievement gains from year to year is important, but we also have to understand that it's essential to let that ripple effect take place, depending upon context and the particular principal, personal characteristics, It may take several years. And some in the research field and in the policy field would even argue that a very effective principal might go into a school in the first year and student achievement could actually go down. And I know that sounds like a horrible thing to say. But why might it go down? It might go down because ineffective practices that have maintained a low level of student achievement are being disassembled. And that may cause disruption for a year until new programs can be put into place. There's literature that shows that effective principals may actually lower school climate in the first year. That sounds like a horrible thing to say. Why might that happen? Because an effective principal is not going into a low-performing school and maintaining the status quo to produce eternal happiness. That principal is going in to make changes. And teachers who have grown complacent at appreciating the status quo may not like that. And climate may become a little bit more negative as the dead wood or the ones that aren't on board begin to see they need to adjust to changes. And similarly, a principal who is effective that comes into a low-performing school may find that he or she does not have a lot of stakeholder support in the beginning because many people become comfortable with the status quo. Maybe it's a status quo of not trying to work very hard. So this kind of evaluation system tries to produce more information for improvement, more reflection on what is this principal doing to make a difference.
So, so the question on this last slide that we attempted to address is what does this mean at the school level and at the district level? And then as states are helping districts and schools to implement new principal evaluation systems, what can they really do to support? I'll pick out a few things here just to talk about briefly. I mean, one is the principals that we talked to and that we attempted to represent their voices in this report said that they were looking for a rational and feasible process of working with their supervisors and getting the support that they needed and the feedback that they needed in order to improve their practice. So while we're saying that multiple measures are very important, what principals are telling us is that we want these multiple measures to be tied very closely to the work that we're doing, and we want them to be feasible and practical so that the information that we get we will use. We also heard principals say time and again that the quality of the feedback from their supervisors is extremely important. So while we can create a principal evaluation system that is valid, that is reliable, and that looks great on paper, if it's not enacted in a way that provides principals feedback that they can use, and their supervisors are not trained to give feedback in the right way, it probably will not be effective. So there has to be a focus on the quality of feedback and the training of supervisors. The top point here focuses on local design. So some states may have the inclination to move forward and be less flexible with the type of evaluation system that's put forward. Or some districts may be very prescriptive. And what principals said to us is that they were concerned about that. They were concerned that that without flexibility, their supervisors, they would not have the same conversations with their supervisors. So our thought is, and their thought is that principal evaluation systems need to be sensitive to context and therefore need to be locally designed and developed. The principals also told us, and we think this is reflected in the evaluation system, the domains that we're talking about, that they wanted to be held accountable, that raising accountability was important, and that they felt accountability in the current practices out there. But that the accountability measures that were in place were not conducive to raising their the quality of their practice. They wanted feedback that did that. If we're to do that and we're to support principal practices, my next point here is to take a fresh look at the way that professional development happens for school principals. How do principal networks support their practice? Are principals engaged in professional learning communities that support their practice? I think an evaluation system can provide data, but that data has to be used at the state and the district level to improve practice. And finally, the last bullet here is data systems need to be advanced further so that we're capturing evaluation results, and that the data systems are then providing information to decision makers to target professional learning opportunities to principals. So it may be, for instance, that in a district the results of an evaluation show that school and community relations need to be improved across the board. If a district finds that's true for all of its principals, then they can make some careful decisions about the type of professional development or other supports provided to those principals so that their practice can improve. So those are some of the ramifications that we thought of. Steve, you may have some more, or I would turn it over to the audience to talk a little bit more about this. And then I know that Kelly would like to talk about some of the national policy ramifications of this work.
Okay, hi everyone. This is Kelly Pollitt with NAESP, and I'm the Associate Executive Director for Advocacy and Policy here, and I'm just going to add some big picture thoughts for all of you and about this report and the implications for policy now. I think my job is to insert some political reality into the conversation. But first I want to say thank you to Matt and Steve for their work on this report. And in our opinion, this report is really groundbreaking. It's the first of its kind. We've seen the discussion about evaluation specifically related to teachers unfold over the past few years within the federal arena, and it hasn't been particularly inclusive of the teacher voice, and we saw the same phenomena happening with principals and worked to really put a mark that would both advance the profession but also inform policy by including the principal's voice paired with credible, valid research. And I think we did that. When at the federal level, when we started to talk about principal evaluation, there really wasn't a strong knowledge base nor research that informed the policy, and so it was left to many to put together at the state and district level systems that they hadn't really thought about before, or if they hadn't been fully developed. So I think the reality now is that fundamentally principals believe that principal evaluation is a state and local decision, but again, there is a federal role, and that has been inserted, and now the bigger tension is where do we go from here based on this research. And I will add to this discussion that we know with the second term now, with President Obama and the administration, they intend to circle back to the initial policy levers that were put in place on principal evaluation and take a hard look at what's going on, and then potentially put forth additional policy related to both evaluation and principal preparation for that matter. So this report was groundbreaking and informative, to say the least, about what we'll be thinking about going forward. The policy implications really, we believe, lie within the 6 domain areas, and how the federal role can be defined to put up the guardrails or provide that direction as states and districts are moving along their continuum of development of these systems, so that we can truly impact principal performance, and that it is valuable, and all of the things that Matt and Steve talked about, building their capacity to improve. The challenge, and I'll end on this note, and of course we always welcome your feedback, but the challenge with all of this is including policies that would support things like context. And policymakers at the federal level have a very hard time trying to figure out how you create a policy around context, since it really, for many, all boils down to a test score. And so we're really trying to influence their thinking, and not only is it a new paradigm in the practice of a principal evaluation, it's a new paradigm in policy making to try and help lawmakers understand the necessity of multiple measures and how you include the different contextual factors that schools are facing, because it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And this report provides the undergirding for good policy to go down that path. So please stay tuned for the policy developments and what we'll be pushing for. I should note that we are working very closely with our colleagues and friends at the National Association of Secondary School Principals on this effort, and we'll be providing probably more follow-up to all of you in the field about where we'll be going and how we'll be translating this incredibly valuable knowledge into policy. So thank you all.
Thank you. Okay, we have, in your next slide here, we have provided some contact information for you. We always know that in these webinars, it's very helpful. Questions pop up after they're over. And so we wanted to be sure that if you had a question for our researchers, or Kelly Pollitt's not on here, but you always know you can reach her via naesp.org. So please feel free to ask any questions after this session is over. We have another question here. We have some comments from people saying that they really enjoy this work and they look forward to future pieces from it. I would like to ask the question of all of our speakers, if we have a moment here. We've got a couple minutes here. If you have any questions, please write them in the meantime. But for all three of you, what recommendations would you recommend to principals right now, in terms of taking this work? Is there anything you would recommend for them?
Hi, this is Matt. I think I could say a couple things. First of all, I think that the report is very accessible and lays the groundwork for principal evaluation design. So many of the principals on the line and other principals are engaged now in task forces and other conversations about how they should be evaluated. And so if you're involved in that work, I would suggest that you bring this report to the table and ask task force members to really think about and use the report when designing local evaluation systems. My experience with state and districts, those task forces, would suggest that they are really wanting to hear from principals about what the principals need from evaluation, so that it's an important aspect for improving their practice.
Great, thank you. Anybody else?
This is Steve. I agree. I agree with what Matt said. I think that principals are not in the position as decision makers at the state level or necessarily the district level to determine what evaluation system is used, but we would hope that principals would be strong advocates of this type of evaluation approach, because there's really nothing worse that could be done in terms of assessment and evaluation than having an invalid evaluation, an evaluation that isn't based on multiple measures and measures that are fair and under principal's control. The best thing that can happen is to have a very useful evaluation that not only indicates how you performed, which is summative, but how you can get better, which is formative. And so we would hope that principals would advocate to bring this type of evaluation into their states and districts, because the alternative has much worse implications, and this one has very positive implications.
Well, and this is Kelly Pollitt. I would underscore what both Matt and Steve have said, and to say that it's incumbent upon principals to have those conversations with your superintendents and with others at the state level if you are involved in the task force, but more importantly to talk a little bit more about what the contextual factors are that you're facing in your schools, and try to help policymakers understand that they do play or should be included in an effective evaluation, and that there are ways to measure our principals' performance beyond a single test score. And to stay tuned and contact NAESP for any feedback that you have related to what's going on at your local level, because we need to hear from principals in particular about the state of their evaluation and how that practice is going on. So thank you all and thank you to Matt and Steve for your hard work.
And okay, so I'm going to end on this last, we have the last 2 pages of this webinar includes resources. As we talked about putting this thing together, we knew we wanted to put out as many resources for you to look into as possible. So when you download this, please feel free to look up these resources that we have. The report itself also has other resources, so if you download that off of our website, the full report, you'll get a whole laundry list of resources. So I just want to thank our speakers this afternoon for a fantastic job. I do want to thank you all both again, or all 3 of you, for giving us your time and your expertise in this area. And we'll look forward to staying tuned for future webinars, perhaps in this area or in teacher evaluation or whatever. So, and with that, we will close off.